My son put a document on my kitchen table on a Saturday afternoon in October and told me to sign it. And the way he told me, the specific combination of impatience and entitlement in his voice, the way he had placed the pen on top of the paper, as though the signing were already decided and only the physical gesture remained, was the moment I understood that something in my son had been replaced by something else, something I did not recognize and that I was not going to accommodate. The document was a property transfer deed. My name was at the top, in the line marked transferor. The name in the line marked transferee was not Marcus's name. It was his wife's, Rachel Ann Delaney Fontaine. The property being transferred was my house. "This house belongs to my wife now, Mom," he said. "It's already handled. We just need your signature." I looked at the document. I looked at him. I looked at Rachel, who was standing in my living room, in the coat she had not taken off, which told me that she had known they would not be staying long enough to warrant removing it, that this visit had been planned as a transaction, not a family call. I looked at the pen on top of the paper. I want to tell you what I was thinking in that moment, because what I was thinking matters to the account. I was thinking about the first time I signed a document for this house. It was 1991 at the title company office, and the document was the deed that transferred ownership to Thomas and me, and I signed it with a specific feeling of gravity, the gravity of a person who understands that the thing they are signing is not just paper, but the physical form of years of work and intention. Thomas signed beside me with the same gravity. We had looked at each other across the table and smiled in the way that people smile when something important and long worked for has finally arrived. I thought about Thomas, about the specific quality of his absence, which is still present in this house the way that absence can be, not as emptiness, but as a shape, an outline, the specific negative space of a person who is here for 30 years and is here still in the way that someone leaves themselves in a space they have loved. I thought about Thomas, and I looked at the pen, and I thought, no, whatever this is, whatever Marcus needs, and whatever Rachel wants, I am not signing this document. I am 66 years old, and I have maintained this house for 33 years, and it is mine, and it will remain mine. Then the front door opened. "Already handled," I said. "What does that mean?" "I mean the lawyer already drew it up. It's all ready. You just need to sign." "Marcus," I said, "this is my house. I have lived in this house for 33 years. I own this house. What is happening here?" He sat down across from me at the table. He had the specific posture of a man who has rehearsed a conversation and is now delivering the rehearsed version rather than having an actual one. Controlled, leaning slightly forward, speaking in a tone he had apparently decided was persuasive. "We've been talking about this for a while," he said. "You know the financial situation. Rachel and I need to be able to use the house as collateral for the business. If it's in her name, the loan is cleaner. It's just paperwork, Mom. Nothing changes for you." "Nothing changes for me except that I no longer own my home," I said. "That's not how it works." "That is exactly how it works," I said. "If Rachel's name is on the deed, Rachel owns the house. I know what a deed is, Marcus. I am 66 years old, not 6. He looked at Rachel. Something passed between them that had the specific quality of two people who have divided a task between themselves and who are now executing the division. He was the argument, she was the pressure, and the pressure was present even in her silence, in the way she stood in my living room in her coat and said nothing. I stood up. I picked up the pen. I looked at my son. And then the front door opened. My name is Adele Christine Fontaine. I am 66 years old. I am a retired librarian and a widow, and the owner of the house at 1422 Magnolia Drive in Durham, North Carolina, which I have owned since 1991, and which I intend to own until I die. I have one son, Marcus, who is 40 years old, and I have one brother, the Honorable Raymond Louis Beaumont, who is a senior judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit and who had apparently been waiting in his car in my driveway for the past 20 minutes. He came in without knocking because he has never knocked at my house in 40 years of visiting it. He was carrying a file. Before I tell you about Raymond and the file, I need to tell you about the house, because the house is the whole story. I bought the house at 1422 Magnolia Drive in 1991 with Thomas, my husband. Thomas had been a civil engineer for Raleigh-Durham City Services, and I had been the head librarian at the Durham Public Library's East Branch. And between us, we had saved $11,000 over 7 years of careful living. Careful in the specific way of two people who grew up without resources and who had decided separately and together that careful was the only path to permanent. The house cost $134,000 in 1991. We took a mortgage at the prevailing rate, which Thomas managed with the specific methodical attention he brought to all financial matters. Automatic payments, occasional extra principal, the patient arithmetic of people who understand that small, consistent actions over long time horizons produce large outcomes. Thomas died in 2009. Heart disease, the specific accumulation of a genetic tendency that had been managing itself for years before it stopped managing. He was 54. We had been married for 30 years, and I had spent 6 years preparing in the way that the spouse of a person with a diagnosed condition prepares, not with drama, but with the quiet, practical attention to what would need to happen after. What needed to happen after was manageable. The mortgage was almost paid off. Thomas had been making extra principal payments for 12 years, and the balance was small. I paid it off entirely in 2011. Since 2011, the house has been mine, free and clear, with no encumbrance of any kind. And the deed has my name on it alone, which is the fact that Marcus apparently believed required correction. The house is not grand. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a kitchen that I renovated in 2015 with money I had saved over the preceding 4 years, a backyard with a vegetable garden that I tend with the same patience that Thomas applied to the mortgage. It is approximately 1,800 square feet. It is worth at current market values something in the range of $380,000, which is the specific number that I believe prompted Marcus to pursue the transfer. I want to say something about the house that is not financial. Thomas and I brought Marcus home from the hospital to this house in 1984. He learned to walk in the living room on the heart pine floors that I have kept polished for 33 years. He did his homework at the kitchen table that is still in the kitchen, The same table where Marcus placed the transfer deed on a Saturday in October. He grew up inside these walls, and I watched him do it. And the watching was the specific joy that a parent has, the joy of proximity to the unfolding of a person's life. I have watered the vegetable garden every morning since Thomas died. I have preserved his engineering texts on the shelf in the study where he kept them. I have maintained every room the way that a person who loves a space maintains it, with attention, with care, with the specific respect of someone who understands that the space has earned the care. This is the house Marcus wanted to transfer to his wife's name as collateral for a business loan. Let me tell you something about 1422 Magnolia Drive that the market appraisal does not capture. The front porch has a swing that Thomas hung in 1995. I still sit on it in the mornings when the weather permits, which in North Carolina is more mornings than not. Thomas used to sit beside me on the swing and drink his coffee before work, and we did not always talk. Often we just sat and watched the street wake up, the specific gentle activity of a neighborhood in the morning, the dog walkers and the paper carriers and the early commuters. The swing still hangs where Thomas put it. The hardware is the original hardware. The hallway between the front door and the kitchen has a section of wall where I marked Marcus's height every year on his birthday. The marks are still there, not painted over, not wallpapered. He's still visible under the light in the specific pencil of Thomas's careful hand, and the date beside each mark. Marcus at 4 feet 2, Marcus at 4 feet 7, Marcus at 5 feet 1, 5 feet 6, 5 feet 11, and then the gap where he turned 18 and went to college and came back taller than me. And we laughed, and Thomas put one last mark at the top and wrote, "Done." I have painted that hallway once since Thomas died. I painted carefully around the marks. The marks are still there. This is the house Marcus wanted to transfer. Not just the 3 bedrooms and the market value. This. He had not discussed this with me before the Saturday in October. He had not apparently expected any discussion to be necessary. Marcus Thomas Fontaine is 40 years old, and I want to tell you who he is honestly, because the honest account is the only account worth giving. Marcus grew up in this house with advantages that Thomas and I had not had. 2 parents who were present and attentive, financial stability that did not require him to work in high school, an education that we funded through the careful management of a college savings account that Thomas had established when Marcus was 3. He had opportunities. He had support. He had the specific foundation that 2 people who did not have it themselves build specifically so that their children will. He was a good child. I want to say this clearly. He was warm and smart and funny, and the years of his growing up were some of the best years of my life. He made the mistakes that teenagers make, and he came through them with the help of parents who were paying attention. And he went to college and graduated and found work in commercial real estate and married Rachel at 33. And I was glad at his wedding in the specific way of a mother who sees her child happy. What happened after the wedding is what I am trying to understand even now, 4 months after the October Saturday, and I am not certain I have arrived at a complete understanding. What happened as best I can reconstruct? Marcus entered the commercial real estate business with genuine aptitude and early success, which produced in him a specific confidence that is reasonable when things are going well, and that becomes a liability when they are not. Things stopped going well approximately 3 years ago. The details of why are Marcus's to explain, and not mine to speculate about extensively, but the shape of it, from what I observed, and from what Raymond's investigation produced, is this: a series of increasingly large investments in commercial properties that did not perform as projected, financed through loans that were secured against the early investments, which produced a cascading structure in which underperformance in one property stressed the financing of others. By the October Saturday, Marcus had approximately $140,000 in loans against commercial properties that were generating income well below the loan service requirements. He needed additional collateral or additional capital or both, and he had apparently decided, without consulting me, without explaining the situation, without any of the conversation that I would have been willing to have, that the easiest solution was to transfer my house to Rachel's name so that it could be used as collateral for a refinancing. I do not know whose idea the transfer was, Marcus's or Rachel's. I'm inclined to believe it was a joint decision, because both of them arrived at my house on that Saturday with the specific coordinated manner of people who have agreed on an approach. But the origin of the idea matters less than what it tells me about the state of my son's judgment. He believed that the appropriate response to a financial difficulty of his own creation was to take his mother's home without her consent. He believed I would simply sign. Or I've been trying to understand this belief of his, the belief that I would sign, because it tells me something about what happened to my son in the years I was not fully watching. The Marcus who grew up in this house would not have tried to take it. The Marcus who learned to walk on these floors and did his homework at the kitchen table and helped Thomas in the vegetable garden, that Marcus would not have placed a transfer deed in front of his mother with a pen on top of it. He would not have said the words, "This house belongs to my wife now." Something happened between that boy and this man, and the something was, I think, the specific transformation that debt produces in people who let it. Debt has a narrowing effect. I have observed it in other people over the course of my life. Friends, library patrons who came to me for financial literacy resources, distant family members. What debt does when it becomes sufficiently large and sufficiently pressing is it replaces the ordinary moral vocabulary with a single vocabulary of need. What do I need, and how do I get it? And what stands between me and it? Everything that is not the debt becomes a resource to be evaluated for its usefulness in addressing the debt. My house became a resource in this vocabulary. I became a person who would sign if the right combination of pressure and logic was applied. He did not know about Raymond. He also did not know that I had been a librarian for 35 years, and that librarians are people who are not easily managed by information presented as though it were the only information available. And I have spent my professional life helping people understand that there is always more information, always another document, always another perspective. A transfer deed placed in front of you is a document, but so is a deed in your own name, so is a file compiled by a federal judge. He had underestimated the documents I had access to. The Honorable Raymond Louis Beaumont is 68 years old and has been a judge for 23 of those years. First as a district court judge in North Carolina for 11 years, then as a judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit for the last 12. He sits on a court that reviews federal decisions for a region covering North Carolina, South Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, and West Virginia. His opinions are read and cited across the federal judiciary. He is by any measure a man of significant legal authority and substantial legal knowledge. He is also my older brother, and he has been calling me every Sunday afternoon since our mother died in 1998, and he came to visit for Christmas every year without exception, from the year Thomas died until this year. And when I called him 4 weeks before the October Saturday to tell him that something was happening with Marcus and that I was worried, he drove from Richmond, where he lives, to Durham, where I live, in under 3 hours. I want to tell you about that first visit 4 weeks before the Saturday, because the visit was where everything began. I had called Raymond on a Tuesday evening after a phone call with Marcus that left me with the feeling I associate with Marcus in recent years, the feeling of being managed, not deceived exactly, but managed. The sense that the conversation I was having was a performance of a conversation, that Marcus was saying the words that would produce the response he wanted, rather than the words that were true. The Tuesday call had been about money. Marcus had mentioned, with the casual tone of someone trying not to seem urgent, that he was exploring refinancing options and that it might involve using the house for a few things. I had asked what he meant. He had been vague. I had asked more directly. He had said he would explain soon and change the subject. I called Raymond after I hung up. I said, something is happening with Marcus, and I do not know what it is, and I need your help finding out. Raymond was quiet for a moment, in the way he gets when he is listening to something fully before he responds. Then he said, "Do you want me to find out what is actually happening?" I said yes. Raymond spent 4 weeks finding out what was actually happening. He did this not through any official judicial capacity. Judges do not use their authority to conduct personal investigations, and Raymond is too careful and too ethical to cross that line. But through the specific network of professional relationships that a federal appellate judge accumulates over 23 years, attorneys who know accountants, who know people in the commercial real estate financing world, who understand what a loan portfolio under stress looks like, and who, in a professional context, can assemble a picture of what is happening to a specific borrower. What the picture showed. Marcus had, in addition to the $140,000 in commercial property loans, a separate debt of approximately $68,000 in what Raymond described to me carefully as instruments that are not conventional financing. I did not immediately understand what this meant. Raymond explained. Marcus had borrowed $68,000 from private lenders, not banks, not licensed financial institutions operating in the Durham and Raleigh area. These lenders charge interest rates that are not permissible under North Carolina's usury statutes. They are also in several specific documented cases that Raymond's contacts had identified, connected to individuals who were under federal investigation for financial crimes. Illegal lenders, I said. Correct, Raymond said. Marcus borrowed $68,000 from illegal lenders. Yes. I sat with this for a moment. Is he in danger? I said. He is in a situation that carries risk, Raymond said. Whether that risk becomes danger depends on what happens in the next several weeks. If the transfer of your property goes through and the refinancing proceeds, do the illegal lenders get paid and the risk decreases? If the transfer does not go through, he paused. If the transfer does not go through, Marcus is going to need legal help, Raymond said. And the legal help he needs is the kind where having a federal judge for an uncle is genuinely useful. You're going to help him, I said. I'm going to give him a choice, Raymond said. That's different. He drove to Durham from Richmond on the Saturday in question and parked in my driveway and waited. He waited because I had called him that morning to tell him Marcus was coming, and Raymond had decided that the appropriate time to appear was after I had heard what Marcus intended, not before. He has always had excellent timing. Raymond came into my house without knocking, as I have said, because he has never knocked at my house in 40 years. He is 68 years old, and he was wearing the specific weekend clothes that Raymond wears when he is not in his judicial robes: khaki trousers, a blue wool sweater, the reading glasses that he has had since he was 50, and that he keeps on a cord around his neck. He carries himself with the specific quality of presence that federal judges tend to develop after 20 years on the bench. Not aggressive, not intimidating, but unmistakably authoritative. He looked at Marcus. Marcus looked at him. Rachel looked at Raymond. Raymond set the file on the kitchen table next to the transfer deed that Marcus had placed there. The room was very quiet. "Hello, Marcus," Raymond said. "It's good to see you. And I'm sorry the circumstances aren't better." Marcus said, "Uncle Raymond." His voice had the quality of a man who has just understood that his situation has changed in a way he did not anticipate. "Sit down," Raymond said. He said it gently, without command, in the tone that people who are genuinely authoritative use when they do not need to impose. Marcus sat. Rachel sat. I remained standing by the window. "I'd like to have an honest conversation," Raymond said, "and I want to start by telling you what I know, because the conversation will be more productive if we're starting from the same information." He opened the file. I want to describe what was in the file because the file is the pivot of the account. It contained a summary of Marcus's commercial property loans and their current performance, are prepared by a licensed financial analyst, documentation of the $68,000 in private loans, including the names and known associations of the lenders, copies of communication records between Marcus and representatives of those lenders, and a legal memorandum prepared by Raymond himself, describing the federal statutes under which the lending arrangements potentially constituted violations, including the specific violations to which Marcus's participation might expose him. The memorandum also noted, in a section Raymond described to me later as the offer, the specific circumstances under which prosecutorial discretion might not be exercised, circumstances that included, as Raymond explained them to Marcus, full cooperation with any investigation, immediate cessation of the lending arrangements, and a formal documented commitment to refrain from certain described actions in the future. One of the described actions was attempting to transfer ownership of Adele Christine Fontaine's residential property at 1422 Magnolia Drive, Durham, North Carolina. Marcus read the file. He was a very long time reading it. "I want to tell you what was said in my kitchen that Saturday afternoon, because what was said matters, and because the account should be honest about it." When Marcus finished reading the file, he looked up at Raymond. His face had the specific quality of a man who has been in a room he believed he had full authority over, and who has discovered very quickly that the authority was an illusion. "How much of this is actionable?" he said. He is, at heart, a practical man, and the practical man's first question in a difficult situation is, what are the consequences? "All of it," Raymond said. "The question is whether the consequences are pursued. That's a prosecutorial decision, not mine. I'm not a prosecutor, but I have relationships with the people who are, and I understand how these decisions are made. And I can tell you that what is in that file would give a motivated prosecutor a great deal to work with." "What do you want?" Marcus said. Raymond looked at me. I said, "I want my son to look at me and explain what he was thinking when he put a transfer deed on my kitchen table and told me to sign it." Marcus looked at me. The composure he had arrived with, the practiced, rehearsed quality of the conversation he had planned to have, was completely gone. What was in its place was something that I recognized, because I have known my son's face for 40 years. It was the face he makes when he has understood something fully and is managing the weight of the understanding. He said, "I was thinking about the money. I was thinking that if I could just get the refinancing sorted, everything else would work out. And the quickest way to do that was—" He stopped. "Was to use my house," I said. "Yes," without asking me. "I knew if I asked you, you'd say no." "Yes," I said. "I would have said no. That is the correct thing to say when your son tries to use your home as collateral for his business debts. No is the correct answer." The room was quiet again. Then Marcus said something I had not expected. He did not say it to Raymond, and he did not say it to Rachel. He said it to me, in the tone he has had since he was a teenager, when he has understood something he does not want to have understood. "I've been treating you like a resource," he said, "not like my mother. I've been looking at this house and seeing money, and I've been looking at you and seeing someone who would sign if I pushed hard enough. That's not what you are. That's not who you are." I did not say anything for a moment. Then I said, "No, it is not." Raymond gave Marcus a choice. I want to describe the choice precisely because the precision is what makes it fair rather than simply powerful. The choice was not between jail and freedom. Raymond was clear about this, and clear about the limits of his own role. He is a judge, not a prosecutor, and the decision about whether to pursue charges was not his to make. What he could offer was his professional assessment of the situation and his personal willingness to advocate. The choice, as Raymond framed it, Marcus could continue on the path he was on, attempting to transfer the property, securing the refinancing, paying the illegal lenders, in which case the situation would continue to develop toward consequences that Raymond could not prevent and would not try to prevent. Or Marcus could accept the terms Raymond had outlined in the memorandum: full cooperation with a voluntary disclosure to the relevant federal investigators, immediate cessation of the illegal lending arrangements, and a formal documented commitment regarding his mother's property. "What does full cooperation look like?" Marcus said. "It means you go in voluntarily with an attorney, and you provide accurate and complete information about the arrangements," Raymond said. "You don't wait to be found. You go first. Prosecutorial discretion is much more likely to be exercised favorably for someone who presents themselves voluntarily than for someone who is found. And if I do that, Marcus said, what happens? I can't promise an outcome, Raymond said. I can tell you what the relevant factors are. First, you are not the primary target of any investigation. The lenders are. Your cooperation advances the investigation of the people who are actually the targets. That has value. Second, you have no prior record. Third, the amounts involved are significant, but not at the level that typically drives aggressive prosecution. When there is cooperation, I believe, based on my experience with how these decisions are made, that a voluntary cooperative approach results in no charges. I can't promise that, but I believe it. And the other thing, Marcus said, the thing about my mother. The documented commitment, Raymond said. Yes, that is a condition of the offer. You formally commit in a legal document prepared by an attorney that you will not attempt to transfer, encumber, or in any way affect the ownership status of your mother's property, ever, under any circumstances. Marcus looked at Rachel. This was the moment I watched most carefully, because it was the moment that would tell me something important. Whether Rachel would be the person who encouraged him toward the right decision, or the person who pulled toward the wrong one. Rachel said, Marcus, do it. I had not expected this. I want to record it accurately, because Rachel deserves the credit. When it mattered, she said the right thing. She did not argue for her name on the deed. She did not push for the transfer. She looked at her husband and she said, do it. Marcus looked at me. He said, I'm sorry, Mom. I know, I said. We'll get through it, but you have to do what Raymond is telling you. He nodded. He looked at the transfer deed on the table. He picked it up. He tore it in half. The sound of it was small. 2 pieces of paper. Marcus set them on the table, and Raymond looked at them and said nothing. And Rachel looked at them and said nothing, and I looked at them. There is a specific quality to the silence that follows a decisive action in a room full of people who have been in conflict. The conflict does not end with the action. It continues to exist. The facts of it unchanged. The damage is not yet repaired. The distance is not yet closed. But the direction changes. The silence that followed the tearing was the silence of people who understood that the direction had changed. I picked up the 2 pieces of the transfer deed. I held them for a moment. Then I walked to the recycling bin under the sink and put them in. When I turned back, Marcus was looking at me with the expression he has had since he was 12, when he has done something he regrets, and is watching to see whether it can be repaired. He has always believed at his core that things can be repaired. I raised him to believe this, and I am glad I did. I sat back down at the table. I said, Raymond, will you stay for dinner? Raymond said, yes. I was hoping you would ask. Marcus and Rachel stayed too. It was not comfortable. Comfort was not available that evening, and I was not going to pretend it was. But we ate together at the kitchen table where the deed had been, and we talked carefully about careful things. And by the end of the meal, we were something that was not yet repaired, but was pointing in the right direction. Raymond washed the dishes. He always washes dishes when he comes to dinner, and he has done this since he was 12 and I was 8, and we helped our mother clear the table, and the habit has never left him. I watched my brother wash my dishes in my kitchen, and I thought, This is what I was afraid of losing, not just the house. This. Marcus made the voluntary disclosure in November. He went with his own attorney. Raymond gave him 3 names, highly competent defense attorneys in the federal practice area who understood how these situations worked, and he provided the cooperation that Raymond had described. The process was not easy, and it was not brief. It involved multiple conversations with federal investigators, the production of documents, and the specific discomfort of a person who has done something wrong walking through the full account of the wrongdoing in detail. Raymond had been right about the outcome. No charges were filed against Marcus. The investigation, which Raymond had no direct role in. He is a judge, not a prosecutor, and the ethical wall between those 2 things is one he maintains absolutely. Focused on the private lenders, several of whom were subsequently indicted on charges that included usurious lending and other financial crimes. Marcus was a witness and a source of information, not a defendant. The commercial property situation was resolved through a different kind of difficulty. Marcus worked with a legitimate financial advisor to restructure the loans, sold one of the properties at a loss, and arrived at an arrangement that was sustainable, though not comfortable. He will be paying the price of the last 3 years of decisions for several more years. This is the appropriate consequence of decisions, and I have not tried to shield him from it. Rachel, I have been thinking about carefully, and I want to say what I think accurately. Rachel's behavior on the Saturday in October was not acceptable. She was present and complicit in what Marcus was attempting, and the coach she kept on tells me she understood exactly what kind of visit it was. The behavior I observed in November, when she said do it at the critical moment, was different and better, and I have held both in my assessment of her. She is not a person I will ever fully trust in the way that I trusted Thomas. But she is also not a person I have decided to write off. She was in a difficult marriage situation that she had helped create, and when the moment came, she made the better choice. Do it at the right moment is worth something. I want to tell you more about the November process, because what Marcus went through matters to understanding who he is now. And he found an attorney from Raymond's list, Patricia Chen, federal criminal defense in the Raleigh-Durham area for 20 years. He called her the Sunday after the October Saturday. The following Friday, they went in together for the first conversation with the investigators. I know this because Marcus called me afterward from Patricia Chen's car. He said, "I just sat in a room for 2 hours and told 2 federal agents every stupid decision I made over the last 3 years. I said, 'How do you feel?' He was quiet. Then, 'Smaller, but clean. Smaller, but clean.' The specific combination of diminishment and relief that comes from honest confession, not the religious kind, the secular kind, the full honest account told to people who are going to act on it. The privacy that was protecting you from consequences is gone, but the weight is gone too. And the investigations ran several months. Marcus was cooperative throughout. No charges were filed against him. The lenders were the targets. Marcus was a witness and a source. This is what Raymond had predicted, and Raymond has been a federal appellate judge for 12 years. And was not guessing. In December, Rachel came to see me alone. No explanation attempted. She sat at the kitchen table and was quiet. And then she said, "I told him not to do it the first time he brought it up. The second time I said nothing. The third time I went along. That is on me. I said, yes, it is. She said, I knew what this house was when we drove here that Saturday. I knew it was not just a number. I went along anyway. That is what I am most ashamed of. I thought about it. Then, I cannot tell you I have forgiven you, but I understand that people make mistakes in difficult situations, and understanding is not the same as forgetting, and also not the same as holding it permanently. What you do from here determines what we become to each other. She said, I am going to try to be worth something different. Good, I said. So is Marcus. We drank our tea. She helped me put away the winter squash. It was not warmth, not yet, but it was the beginning of what warmth can come from. Marcus and I have had several conversations since October. Not the one conversation that settles everything. These things do not settle in one conversation, but the series of conversations that constitute the actual work of repairing something. And he has come to Magnolia Drive twice since October, and we have sat at the kitchen table, the same table where the transfer deed was placed and then torn. And we have talked about what happened and what it means and what comes next. He has also begun tending the vegetable garden. He came on the third Sunday of November and asked me to show him what needed to be done before winter, and I showed him, and he did it with the specific patient attention that I have not seen from him since he was a child helping Thomas in the yard. I watched him turn the soil, and I thought, the person who grew up in this house is still in there. The person who forgot that it was a house and started seeing only an asset. That person is also still in there and will require attention. But the first person is not gone. I want to tell you more about Raymond because the account is not complete without him described as fully as he deserves. Raymond and I grew up in Edenton, North Carolina, in a house considerably smaller than 1422 Magnolia Drive, in a family where the money was never quite enough, but where the love always was. Our father worked at a textile mill for 30 years. Our mother taught Sunday school and maintained a garden, and read to us every night until we were old enough to read to ourselves. And then she continued reading to us because she understood that being read to is not only for children who cannot read. Raymond was 4 years older than me, which meant that by the time the specific difficulties of childhood arrived for me, he had already been through them and could tell me what to expect. As he was the first person in our family to go to college, on a scholarship that he obtained by being the kind of student who makes admissions, committees understand immediately that here is someone who will make the institution proud. He was the first person in our family to go to law school, to clerk for a federal judge, to join a law firm, to be appointed to the district court, to be elevated to the appellate court. None of this made him less the person who called our mother every Sunday, and who came home for every Christmas that he could, and who, when I called him in the autumn of 2022 to tell him I was worried about Marcus, drove 3 hours from Richmond without being asked twice. I want to say something about what Raymond's presence meant on that Saturday, because the presence itself is the meaning of this account. And when the door opened and Raymond came in, I felt, and I want to find the precise word, I felt found. Not rescued, because I am not a person who needs rescuing in the simple sense, but found in the specific way that a person feels found when someone who has always been in their corner shows up at the moment that matters. Raymond had been in my corner since I was 4 years old. The fact that I was now 66 did not change the quality of that presence. If anything, the 62 years of it made the presence heavier with meaning. He is the Honorable Raymond Louis Beaumont, senior judge on the United States Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit. He is also my brother who drove 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon because his sister called him and said she was worried. Both of these things are equally true, and the legal title is the tool. The love is what moved him to use it. I want to tell you more about what Raymond and I came from, because the origin is relevant to understanding what he is. We grew up in Edenton, North Carolina, in a house considerably smaller than 1422 Magnolia Drive, in a family where the money was never quite enough, but where the love always was. Our father worked at a textile mill for 30 years. Our mother taught Sunday school and maintained a garden and read to us every night until we were old enough to read to ourselves. And then she continued reading to us because she understood that being read to is not only for children who cannot read. Raymond was 4 years older than me, which meant that when the specific difficulties of childhood arrived for me, he had already been through them. When I was 10 and afraid of starting middle school, Raymond was 14 and had already navigated it and told me which teachers were kind and which were not, and which lunch table was the right one. He was never impatient with these conversations. He had the specific patience of someone who understands that the things that seem small from the outside are large from the inside. When I was 16 and our father was laid off from the mill, Raymond was 20 and working 2 jobs to stay in college, and he sent money home, a consistent amount every month for 2 years. He sent it without being asked and without making a production of it. Our mother accepted it with the quiet dignity with which she accepted all the difficult things of those years. I did not know until I was an adult how much he had sent, or for how long, because he had not wanted me to know at the time. He had wanted me to be able to be 16 without carrying that weight. This is the thoughtfulness of someone who loves someone enough to protect them from the knowledge of what love requires. I have been thinking about this a great deal in the months since October, about the relationship between love and capability. Raymond's legal knowledge and judicial authority were what made the file possible and what made Marcus understand the weight of his situation. But those qualities, without the love that drove them to action, would have been irrelevant. He was not acting as a federal judge on that Saturday. He was acting as my brother with a federal judge's tools. True family is the one that stands by you when you are at your weakest. This is the sentence that the account is supposed to carry. Ben Raymond is what the sentence looks like in practice. A 68-year-old man in a blue wool sweater, reading glasses on a cord, carrying a file, walking into his sister's house without knocking because he has never needed to knock. I want to tell you about a conversation that happened 6 weeks after the October Saturday, because the conversation is not the dramatic moment of the account, but it is, in its way, the most important one. Marcus came to the house on a Sunday morning. He had called the night before to ask if he could come. He arrived with coffee from the bakery I like, which he has known about since it opened, and he brought 2 cups, and we sat in the living room rather than at the kitchen table, which was a choice I noted and found appropriate. The kitchen table is where the formal difficult things happen in this house. And the living room is where the ordinary, intimate things happen. And Marcus's choice of the living room told me he wanted to have the ordinary, intimate thing rather than the formal, difficult thing. He talked about the process, about what it had been like to sit in a room with federal investigators and describe in detail decisions he had made that he was ashamed of, about the specific quality of that kind of honesty, the clarity it produces, the weight it lifts, the specific form of relief that comes not from being absolved, but from having said the true thing out loud in the presence of people who are listening to it. I kept thinking about what I almost did, he said. Putting that paper on your table, putting the pen on it. I keep going back to that specific moment, the pen on the paper, and thinking about who I was in that moment, who I had become. What did you understand about who you had become? I said. That I had stopped seeing you, he said. I had been so deep in the financial stuff for so long that everything had become a number. Because the properties were numbers, the loans were numbers. And when I looked at this house, I saw a number too. I stopped seeing that you lived here, that you'd lived here for 33 years, that Dad died in this house. He stopped for a moment. That it's your home. I said, when did you start seeing it as a number? He thought about this. I think it was gradual. It wasn't a single decision. It was a lot of small decisions over 3 years that each seemed reasonable in the moment, and that added up to me sitting across from you with a pen and a deed and expecting you to sign. That is what debt does, I said. It narrows your vision. Everything becomes about the debt. I've seen it in other people. I've read about it in the financial literature. I didn't know I was watching it happen to my own son. You called Raymond, he said. I called Raymond 4 weeks before you came with the document, I said, because I knew something was wrong. I could hear it in your voice when we talked, and I didn't know what it was, and I was frightened, and I called the person I call when I am frightened. I'm glad you called him, Marcus said. I know that's a strange thing to say, but I'm glad. I looked at my son, 40 years old, holding a coffee cup in the living room of the house he grew up in. I'm glad too, I said. Thank you for not just signing, he said. Thank you for tearing it up, I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, I almost didn't. I know, I said. What made you? He started and then stopped. I waited. What made you not sign it, he said, before Raymond came in. You were standing there with the pen. You hadn't signed. What stopped you? So I thought about how to answer this honestly. Then I said, I thought about your father. I thought about the morning I signed that deed with him in 1991. I thought about what the house is and what it cost and what it is made of. And I thought, I am not going to do this. He said, just like that? Just like that, I said. 66 years of living teaches you that the decisions that matter most are sometimes made in a very short time. The preparation for them is long. The decision itself is short. He nodded. He finished his coffee. He said, I want to come back next Sunday, I said. The garden will need attention. I know, he said. That's why I'm coming. It is February now, 4 months after the October Saturday, and I am in the living room of the house at 1422, Magnolia Drive, writing this account on the computer that Thomas bought in 2008 and that I have maintained through 2 memory upgrades and 1 keyboard replacement because it still works and because I am not a person who discards things that still work. The vegetable garden is dormant under the specific quiet of a February that has been unusually mild. Raymond called last Sunday from Richmond. Marcus came to the garden 2 Sundays ago, and we planted garlic. Garlic goes in the fall or the very early spring, and we had missed the fall. And he stayed for lunch, and we talked about Thomas and about childhood and about things that we had not talked about in the years when the relationship was managed rather than lived. Our Rachel came with him. She sat at the kitchen table while we gardened, and she made tea and set it out for when we came in, which was a small gesture of domestic care that I received as such. We are not close, Rachel and I. We may not become close, but we are in the process of becoming honest with each other, which is a foundation that closeness can eventually build on. I want to close this account with the thing it is about. True family is the one that stands by you when you are at your weakest. Raymond walking in without knocking. Raymond driving 3 hours from Richmond because his sister called him worried. Raymond standing in my kitchen in his blue wool sweater with a file that he had spent 4 weeks assembling. None of that required the title. The title made the file more authoritative, and the title made Marcus understand the weight of his situation. But the 4 weeks of work that produced the file, and the 3-hour drive, and the door opened without knocking, those things came from something older and more permanent than any title. They came from 62 years of being my brother. I grew up in Adenton in a small house where the money was not enough. I grew up with a father who worked at a mill, and a mother who read to us at night, and a brother 4 years older, who was the first of us to understand that the world beyond Edenton was available if you were willing to work for it, and who went there and succeeded there and never, not once, closed the door behind him. Raymond left and kept the door open. He has been keeping it open for 64 years. I want to tell you what keeping the door open looks like over 64 years, because the account should be specific. It looks like calling every Sunday afternoon for 24 years since our mother died, without skipping, without letting the call become a formality. Raymond calls at 2:30 and we talk for an hour, sometimes longer, about everything and nothing. The cases he is working on in the vague terms appropriate to a judge discussing pending matters. The books we have both been reading, because we were raised by a mother who read aloud, and we have both continued reading throughout our lives. The news, the family, the memory of our parents, which comes up more and more as we get older and which neither of us minds. It looks like being at the hospital in 2009 when Thomas died, arriving within 4 hours of my call, even though I had not specifically asked him to come. Sitting in the hospital corridor with me for 2 hours, and then driving me home and sitting in my kitchen while I could not sleep and saying nothing, just being present, because presence is what that kind of grief requires. It looks like asking about Marcus on every Sunday call for 3 years, noticing the specific way I talked about him, and when I finally called to say I was worried, driving 3 hours without needing to be asked twice. This is what 64 years of the door being open looks like. Not the dramatic moments, not only the dramatic moments, the Sunday calls and the hospital arrivals, and the 3-hour drives. The accumulated weight of ordinary presence that becomes, over 6 decades, and the specific certainty that when the moment comes, someone will be there. Marcus is building this now. He does not have 64 years of it yet. He has 4 months of Sunday mornings in the garden and Tuesday phone calls that are more honest than they were before, and a December morning at a kitchen table where his wife helped put away squash, and his mother accepted that help without requiring more than it was. 4 months is not 64 years, but it is the beginning of 64 years. Every long relationship begins the same way, with a first Sunday morning, a first honest call, a first moment of ordinary presence that accumulates into something worth the name of family. When I needed him in October, the door was open and he came through it. This is what family does when it is functioning as family. It shows up, not in the dramatic moments only, not only when there is a file to carry and a crisis to resolve, but in the Sunday phone calls and the Christmas visits and the 3-hour drives and the quiet presence that accumulates over decades into the specific knowledge that when the moment comes, someone will be there. Marcus is learning this. He is learning that love is not a position you hold, but a practice you perform, daily, imperfectly, with the specific patient attention that gardens require and that relationships require and that all living things require if they are going to continue to live. I am in my house, the house that Thomas and I bought in 1991, and that I have maintained for 33 years, and that is mine, and will remain mine. The deed is in the filing cabinet in the study, where it has been since 2011, when I made the final mortgage payment. The filing cabinet was Thomas's. The deed has my name on it. The pen that Marcus placed on top of the transfer document is, I think, somewhere in a drawer in the kitchen. I kept it. I kept it because it is a useful pen and because I am not a person who wastes things, and because it reminds me of something. It reminds me that there are documents you must not sign, and that the courage to not sign them is itself a form of love, the love that refuses to accept the version of yourself that someone else is trying to create, the love that holds the space of what you actually are, until the people who have been trying to diminish you remember who you actually are. My name is Adele Christine Fontaine. I am 66 years old. I live in my house, which is mine. My son tends my garden on Sunday mornings. My brother calls on Sunday afternoons. This is enough. This is more than enough. This is what I was protecting all along. Not simply the property value or the legal title, not the 3 bedrooms and the 2 bathrooms and the 1,800 square feet, the swing on the porch, the height marks in the hallway, the vegetable garden that Thomas designed and that I have been maintaining as a conversation with the dead for 15 years, the kitchen table where Marcus did his homework, and where I sat with Raymond on the night after Thomas died, and where a transfer deed was placed, and then torn in half and recycled, and where we now eat together on Sunday afternoons. The house is the container. What I was protecting is what is inside the container. Marcus tends the garden on Sunday mornings. Raymond calls on Sunday afternoons. Between the garden and the phone call is my Sunday, the specific span of a day in which the people who matter most are present, one in body and one in voice, both in the way that matters most. I am 66 years old. I have lived in this house for 33 years. I intend to live here for as long as my health and my judgment permit. And when the time comes that it no longer does, the house will go to Marcus. not because he put a deed in front of me and a pen on top of it, but because I will choose it in my own time, on my own terms, as the gift that it has always been, rather than the resource he briefly tried to make it. He knows this. We have not spoken the words, but he knows it. And in the way that children know things about their parents that have been communicated through 40 years of ordinary presence. My name is Adele Christine Fontaine. I am 66 years old. I live in my house, which is mine. My son tends my garden on Sunday mornings. My brother calls on Sunday afternoons. This is enough. This is more than enough. This is what I was protecting all along.